when a narcissist breaks the soul contract with an empath. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. In today's episode on spiritual wisdom, we explore what truly happens when a narcissist breaks the soul contract with an empath, the hidden psychological and spiritual forces behind the pain, the awakening, and the profound transformation that follows. Have you ever felt a connection so intense it changed the course of your life? As you listen, reflect on how these insights apply to your own relationships and inner growth. And if this resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments and let us know what this journey has taught your soul. 1. The connection is a soul contract, not a normal relationship. The empath-narcissist bond is never born from coincidence. It is a pre-life soul agreement woven long before either soul entered a body, where light chooses to meet shadow for the purpose of spiritual awakening. And this is why the connection feels charged with familiarity the instant it begins, as if two stories that were separated finally return to the same page. In this agreement, the empath represents pure, unconditional light, open-hearted, intuitive, and ready to see beneath the surface, while the narcissist embodies the shadow that hides behind ego, performance, and the desperate need to be adored. And this contrast creates a magnetic pull strong enough to feel like destiny. The empath is drawn in because they sense the wounded child behind the narcissist's mask, believing their compassion can heal what is broken. And the narcissist becomes equally attached because the empath's attention acts as a mirror that reflects their idealized self back at them, allowing them to temporarily escape the emptiness they fear. Both enter the connection believing they have found what they were searching for, yet for completely opposite reasons. The empath thinks they have met a soulmate to grow with, while the narcissist believes they have found a perfect reflection that will worship their image. And this difference is what turns the relationship into an emotional battlefield disguised as love. As the bond deepens, the empath continues offering light understanding, patience, softness, forgiveness, while the narcissist feeds off that light to maintain their fragile identity. And over time, the dynamic becomes an unspoken exchange where the empath gives and the narcissist takes, each replaying their deepest unconscious patterns. The empath, driven by spirituality and a longing for emotional truth, believes that if they just love harder, stay softer, or fix themselves, the narcissist will finally open up, while the narcissist becomes increasingly dependent on the empath's attention to hold their fragmented self together. Yet the more light the empath pours into the connection, the more the narcissist must protect their shadow, because being truly seen feels threatening, and so they respond with blame, projection, manipulation, or emotional withdrawal to avoid the mirror the empath's presence creates. This is where the soul contract begins to activate its true purpose, because the empath is forced to confront not only the narcissist's shadow, but their own self-abandonment, the inner wound that taught them to earn love by sacrificing themselves. When the narcissist breaks the connection, whether through discard, betrayal, or cold emotional detachment, it may feel like devastation. But on a higher level, it is the soul contract completing its task, pushing the empath inward to reclaim the light they spent trying to save someone else. The narcissist, confronted with the loss of their mirror, is given a rare chance to face their emptiness, though most will run from it, while the empath begins the deeper work of spiritual awakening by asking hard questions. Why did I believe intensity was love? Why did I ignore my own needs? Why did I stay in a place that dimmed my spirit? Through this painful unraveling, the empath emerges wiser, stronger, and more aligned with their true self, learning that their light is not meant to be a mirror for someone else's ego, but a sanctuary for their own soul. And when the lesson is fully integrated, the empath realizes that this was never a normal relationship. It was a sacred contract designed to break illusions, awaken inner truth, and lead them toward a higher level of spirituality and self-understanding, turning the darkest connection into the beginning of their spiritual awakening. Comment below. I release the soul contract. If you are ready to step into clarity, healing, and your true power. 2. The narcissist doesn't love the empath. They feed on reflection. The narcissist does not truly see your soul. What they see is their own image reflected back through your empathy, your devotion, and your light. And this is the great illusion that traps you at the beginning of the connection, because it feels magical, intense, and destined. Yet it is not built on mutual love, but on emotional reflection, where you are loving while they are feeding. You experience the bond as deep recognition and emotional intimacy, while they experience it as supply, admiration, and confirmation of their identity. And this difference is what slowly creates the inner fracture inside you, because your heart is bonding in truth, while theirs is only performing attachment through the ego. You feel chosen, seen, and valued at first because you are reflecting back everything they long to believe about themselves: power, desirability, importance, control. Yet beneath that illusion, they are not connecting with your inner world, your fears, your softness, or your spiritual depth, but with how your energy makes them feel about who they are. This is why the connection can feel spiritual to you while remaining fundamentally transactional to them. And this is also why the bond begins to break the moment you stop orbiting their reflection. The moment your authenticity rises, your boundaries strengthen, or your own spiritual development begins to unfold. As your awareness expands, the illusion weakens, and what once felt like devotion begins to shift into withdrawal, manipulation, emotional coldness, or devaluation, leaving you confused and questioning what you did wrong, even though this rupture was never caused by failure within you, but by truth surfacing within the connection. You were loving from the soul. They were feeding from the mirror. And when the mirror stops reflecting their fantasy, the narcissist feels threatened instead of inspired, because true intimacy requires vulnerability. And vulnerability is precisely what the narcissistic structure avoids. What feels like heartbreak to you is actually the collapse of illusion. The moment when spirituality separates from emotional attachment, forcing you to confront the difference between being loved and being used as a reflection. The breaking of the soul bond does not mean love has failed. It means the contract of illusion has expired, and your nervous system, your intuition, and your higher awareness are no longer willing to participate in a dynamic where your light is consumed but not honored. You are not losing love. You are losing distortion, projection, and the emotional role you were unconsciously assigned to play. Through this breaking, your spiritual development accelerates in ways that cannot be undone, because you begin to see that real love does not require you to minimize yourself, overgive, or abandon your inner truth to earn connection. You begin to understand that the pain you feel is not punishment, but purification, not rejection, but redirection, not the loss of your worth, but the recovery of it. The narcissist does not leave because you are not enough. They leave because you are becoming too real to be mirrored without exposure. This experience teaches you that spirituality is not built on fantasy, but on clarity, not on seduction, but on self-respect, not on emotional dependency, but on conscious connection. And as this awareness settles into your body, you begin to reclaim the parts of yourself that were dimmed for the sake of harmony. You learn to love without disappearing, to feel without self-betrayal, to connect without losing your center, and to recognize reflection without mistaking it for devotion. 3. The break happens through betrayal, silence, or withdrawal. When the narcissist ultimately reaches the limit of their tolerance, unable to withstand being exposed by the piercing clarity of the empath's light, they do not simply choose to leave. They dismantle the entire reality of the relationship. This is not a rational decision, but a desperate defense mechanism triggered when your authenticity inadvertently shines a light into the dark corners of their psyche that they have spent a lifetime hiding. As Carl Jung famously noted, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And in this dynamic, the narcissist chooses to collapse the connection rather than face the reflection you offer. They retreat into a fortress of emotional coldness, utilizing devaluation or sudden silence as a shield. This withdrawal is often absolute and jarring, leaving you disoriented, as if the person you knew has simply ceased to exist, replaced by a stranger who looks at you with indifference or disdain. This brutal shift creates a silence that is louder than any argument, serving as a form of betrayal that strikes at the very core of your trust. You may find yourself searching for logical explanations, but spiritual wisdom teaches us that this behavior is not about logic. It is about energy preservation for the narcissist's fragile ego. They utilize disappearance or ghosting as a way to regain control, attempting to starve you of the emotional sustenance you once shared. By withdrawing their presence, they attempt to invalidate your reality, making you question your own worthiness. However, this cruel silence is actually a revelation, a clear signal that they can no longer maintain the mask they wore to mirror you. The illusion has shattered because it could not survive the frequency of truth that you naturally embody. Consequently, the true end of this relationship does not happen through a mutual conversation or a formal breakup. It happens as a visceral, energetic event. The soul contract doesn't end outwardly with closure. It snaps energetically inside the empath. You will feel this rupture deep within your intuition, a sudden realization that the cord has been severed and the karmic lesson has concluded. It is a moment of profound internal shifting, where you realize that no amount of love or understanding can bridge the gap that has opened up. This snap is painful, yet it is also the universe's way of liberating you, breaking the tether so that you can stop pouring your light into a void and begin the journey of returning that energy to yourself. Are you ready to release the pain of betrayal and step into your healing? If so, comment below. I choose my healing to honor your commitment to this transformational journey. 4. The empath enters a forced spiritual awakening. Individuation. The breaking of the soul contract does not arrive as a simple ending, but as a forced spiritual awakening that rips through the empath's inner world without warning. What follows is not just emotional pain, but the deep psychological and spiritual destruction of the old self, a collapse so complete that it feels as though the very structure of identity is being dismantled from the inside. Emotional chaos surges first. Grief, confusion, longing, fear, and sudden emptiness collide without order, leaving the empath overwhelmed by waves of feeling that seem too vast to contain. The nervous system struggles to find stability because what once provided emotional orientation has vanished, and the heart is left suspended between what was and what can no longer be. This chaos is not random. It is the psyche breaking open so the soul can surface. As the inner world fractures, the sense of time itself begins to distort. Days feel endlessly heavy, while hours disappear without trace, creating a strange dislocation between the outer world and the inner descent. This altered sense of time reflects the shift from ordinary consciousness into a deeper psychological territory where the unconscious begins to rule. The empath may feel detached from reality, not because they are lost, but because the ego is loosening its grip. The familiar rhythm of life no longer fits, and the mind struggles to orient itself as the past replays. The future dissolves, and the present becomes a strange, weightless space of waiting and reckoning. Dreams intensify as the unconscious rises to the surface, carrying with it symbols of collapse, death, and transformation. Images of falling, crumbling structures, dark waters, endless corridors, and shattered mirrors appear uninvited, each carrying messages the waking mind cannot yet translate. These are not ordinary dreams, but communications from the depths, signaling that the old identity is no longer sustainable. Alongside the dreams comes an inner collapse, a silent crumbling of beliefs, roles, attachments, and self-images that once provided meaning. The empath may feel as though everything they believed about love, connection, and self-worth is dissolving at once, leaving behind a terrifying emotional nakedness. This phase reflects what Jung described as the death of the old identity before rebirth, the necessary destruction that precedes individuation. The empath does not merely lose a relationship, they lose the version of themselves that was shaped around that bond. The personality that learned to overgive, to tolerate confusion, to seek validation through emotional labor, and to survive through attachment can no longer exist in its former form. The collapse forces direct confrontation with the shadow, both the narcissist's and one's own, and exposes the hidden wounds, unconscious patterns, and unhealed childhood imprints that sustain the dynamic. Spirituality shifts from being a concept to an unavoidable inner process, and spiritual awakening becomes less about enlightenment and more about dismantling illusion. Through this destruction, the psyche is stripped down to what is essential. The empath may feel as though they are losing their mind, when in truth they are losing the false self that once protected them. The chaos, the temporal disorientation, the symbolic dreams, and the inner collapse all point toward the same truth. The old identity must die so that a more integrated self can emerge. This is not a gentle initiation. It is ruthless, isolating, and disorienting, but it carries within it the the silent mechanics of rebirth. What feels like total breakdown is, at its core, the beginning of wholeness, taking form beneath the ruins. 5. Residual soul energy causes haunting feelings and dreams. Even after the separation has long been decided in your mind, the empath still feels the narcissist's energy moving through their inner world in quiet but persistent ways, through dreams that suddenly pull their face back into your sleep, through emotional waves that rise without warning, and through synchronicities that feel too precise to ignore. Yet this is not a reunion. This is an energetic residue that must be consciously released. When a soul contract breaks, the emotional and energetic imprint does not always dissolve at the same pace as physical distance. And for an empath whose nervous system is naturally attuned to subtle emotional frequencies, that residue can feel real, heavy, and deeply personal. What lingers is not the person themselves, but the memory stored in your emotional body and subconscious layers. The dreams are not messages inviting you back. They are the mind's way of releasing stored emotion. The sudden sadness that floods your chest is not proof that love still binds you. It is the nervous system discharging stress it once learned to hold. The synchronicities are not signs of destiny reuniting you. They are echoes from a chapter that has not yet been fully integrated within your sense of self. The narcissist once fed on your emotional supply, and the bond was maintained through emotional intensity rather than genuine mutual growth. When that attachment ends, what remains is the pattern, not the purpose. This is where spirituality and spiritual development quietly take over, because this phase is not about the other person anymore. It is about you learning how to retrieve your own energy and restore emotional sovereignty. Carl Jung taught that what continues to haunt us is often part of our own shadow-seeking integration. The connection felt powerful not only because of them, but because it activated your own deepest fears, longings, and survival patterns. The residue you feel now is the final unraveling of the identity you carried inside that bond. It is the part of you that once believed love required self-sacrifice, learning that safety can exist without emotional overextension. Energy does not disappear simply because communication ends. It transforms only through awareness and conscious release. This is why emotional detachment without internal healing often fails, because the bond is not only stored in memory, it is stored in the body. When you return your focus to your breath, your daily rhythm, your creative expression, and your inner stillness, the emotional waves begin to soften. When you refuse to romanticize pain and instead process it with compassion, the dreams start to fade. When you stop interpreting every coincidence as a signal and start grounding your awareness in the present moment, the synchronicities lose their emotional charge. True spiritual development in this phase means choosing integration over obsession, clarity over confusion, and self-trust over emotional dependency. You are not being pulled backward by fate. You are being invited forward by awareness. The lesson moving through you is teaching you that lingering energy does not mean unfinished destiny. It means unprocessed emotion. And what you are ready to process, you no longer need to carry. The value here is simple and practical. Stop mistaking emotional residue for meaning. Stop interpreting memory as a message, and allow your healing to complete the energetic separation that your life has already made. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to activate the notification bell so you never miss deep insights like this. And if you're ready to release the lingering energy that still haunts your soul, comment below. I am freeing my spirit. 6. The empath must release, not rescue. Believing that you must heal or save the narcissist is the most dangerous illusion an empath can carry, because the moment you accept that role, you unknowingly agree to keep the soul contract alive without end, draining your energy while postponing your own healing. This dynamic does not exist to be fixed through sacrifice or endurance, but to be understood through awareness. Because as Carl Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Once you recognize that your urge to rescue is not love, but conditioning, the spell begins to loosen, and spiritual wisdom replaces emotional confusion, allowing you to see that compassion without boundaries is not virtue, it is self-erasure. The true work is not confrontation, persuasion, or emotional struggle, but awareness, emotional neutrality, and energetic detachment, because every emotional reaction feeds the contract, while neutrality quietly dissolves it. Detachment does not mean becoming cold or unfeeling. It means learning how to feel without being controlled, to care without being consumed, and to love without self-betrayal. The narcissist was never meant to be your lifelong mission, but a catalyst that forced you to discover your limits, your patterns, and your power. And when you stop pouring your life force into their wounds, the energetic cords weaken naturally, even if grief lingers for a time. As Jung observed, where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking. And this explains why empathy could never cure the hunger for control, why patience never satisfied domination, and why self-sacrifice only deepened the imbalance. The moment you choose awareness over attachment, neutrality over reaction, and self-loyalty over emotional obligation, the contract begins to collapse on its own, not through force, but through absence of fuel. And in that quiet withdrawal, your spiritual wisdom matures. Your nervous system relearns safety without chaos, and your identity shifts from rescuer to sovereign, where peace no longer depends on anyone else's transformation. 7. The narcissist enters long-term inner collapse after the break. Once the empath's reflective light is gone, the narcissist enters a long and silent collapse, because what breaks is not just a bond, but the false identity that depended on being seen, validated, and emotionally stabilized by someone else. Without that mirror, their inner structure begins to disintegrate as identity collapse takes over, leaving them unsure of who they are without admiration and emotional supply. This collapse feels like a growing void inside them, a hollow space they cannot fill, which pushes them into obsessive replacement attempts. They rush toward new people not out of love, but out of fear, trying to find another empathic presence to regulate their chaos. Yet each new connection feels weaker than the last, and the temporary high fades faster every time, creating an exhausting cycle of pursuit, disappointment, and emotional agitation. As this pattern repeats, paranoia begins to rise, because without the empath's stabilizing energy, the narcissist no longer has anyone to filter their insecurity. Suspicion becomes their constant companion, fear that others will expose them, leave them, or see through their facade. This deepens their emptiness, amplifies their emotional instability, and creates the sense that the world is closing in on them. Inside this turmoil, karmic mirroring quietly activates. Every manipulation they once inflicted, gaslighting, rejection, emotional withdrawal, control, returns to them through new relationships and life experiences. It is not revenge, but consequence, the psyche forcing them to feel what they once caused, so they finally confront the very wounds they spent years projecting onto others. Their suffering, however, remains internal and invisible. On the outside, they may appear confident or unaffected, but inside, they endure a private implosion, restlessness, dissatisfaction, and the unsettling sense that something essential has been lost. With no empathy to regulate their emotions, they oscillate between grandiosity and despair, between entitlement and worthlessness, trying to outrun the shadow they can no longer suppress. This is where spirituality and spiritual awakening subtly weave into the collapse. Without the empath's energy to lean on, the narcissist is finally left alone with their fragmented self, the childhood wounds they denied, and the emotional truths they refused to face. The absence of the empath becomes a mirror they cannot escape, forcing them to confront the consequences of their actions, the emptiness beneath their persona, and the loneliness created by their own patterns. Their inner breakdown unfolds quietly but relentlessly, proving that when the empath withdraws, the narcissist does not simply move on, they unravel from within. Identity collapses, replacements fail, paranoia grows, emptiness expands, and the universe begins returning every hidden truth through karmic reflection. And while the world may never see this descent, it is the most profound fallout of the broken soul contract, a collapse that happens not in public chaos, but in private silence, where no performance can hide the fracture. To honor your strength through this awakening, affirm your clarity and self-worth. Comment below, "I reclaim my power," to mark your rise beyond the shadow and inspire others to choose their own path of healing. 8. The contract ends through the empath's ascension, not reunion. The contract completes only when you stop reacting, stop hoping, and stop trying to save, because at that precise moment, you rise into sovereignty, and the narcissist is forced to face their shadow alone. When you stop reacting, you are no longer emotionally pulled into their storms, their silence, their accusations, or their shifting moods, and you begin to see how much of your energy was once spent proving your worth instead of protecting your peace. You no longer explain yourself endlessly or shrink to avoid conflict. Instead, you choose calm, distance, and emotional self-control, and this quiet shift becomes the first real act of power you have claimed for yourself. When you stop hoping, you are not giving up on love. You are waking up from the illusion that your love can transform someone who refuses to see themselves. Hope once kept you waiting for apologies that never arrived, for growth that was always promised but rarely shown. The moment you release that hope, you also release the emotional suspension that keeps your life on pause. You accept reality as it is instead of how you wished it could be. And this acceptance becomes a radical act of spiritual development because it returns you to truth instead of fantasy. When you stop trying to save, you step out of the rescuer role that once defined your identity in the connection. You recognize that your empathy, no matter how deep, cannot heal a person who does not choose accountability. This is where your understanding of spirituality matures, because you learn that compassion does not require self-sacrifice, and love does not require self-erasure. You realize that each soul must confront its own wounds, and no amount of your effort can replace another person's responsibility to grow. As you withdraw your energy from the cycle, your inner world begins to shift. The attention that once revolved around their approval, their validation, and their emotional needs slowly returns to your own nervous system, your own values, and your own purpose. You begin to feel a new stillness inside yourself, a sense of authority that does not seek permission. This is the moment when you truly rise into sovereignty, not through dominance or superiority, but through self-ownership, discernment, and emotional independence. At the same time, the narcissist loses the mirror that once reflected their importance and soothed their inner emptiness. Without your reactions, your hope, and your rescuing energy, the illusion that sustained them begins to crack. Some will immediately seek another source of validation to avoid themselves, but others will be left alone with the very shadow they spent their lives trying to escape. In that isolation, they are finally confronted by the fear, shame, and unresolved pain that your presence once helped them deny. The completion of the soul contract is not about reunion, closure conversations, or shared healing journeys. It is about the moment you no longer need anything from them to move forward. You carry the lessons inward rather than outward, learning how to recognize manipulation, honor your intuition, and no longer confuse emotional intensity with genuine love. You grow wiser in how you choose, how you give, and how you protect your heart without closing it. What once drained you now instructs you. You learn that empathy without boundaries becomes self-betrayal, that love without accountability becomes a trap, and that spiritual development requires discernment as much as compassion. The contract ends not when both souls agree, but when one soul evolves beyond the need for the bond itself. In the end, when a narcissist breaks the soul contract with an empath, it is not a punishment, but a profound redirection. It is the moment the empath finally remembers their worth, retrieves their power, and steps into the deeper truth of who they were always meant to become. The pain is real, but so is the awakening. And as Carl Jung reminds us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This journey is your invitation to rise, reclaim your light, and rewrite your story with clarity and spiritual wisdom. If this message resonated with you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our upcoming insights. Your growth matters, and we're here to walk this path with you. The psychology of people who have gone through too much. Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars, Carl Jung once said, and nowhere is this truer than in the hidden psychology of those who have been through too much. Today on Spiritual Wisdom, we explore how deep pain reshapes the mind, strengthens the spirit, and for many, becomes the doorway to true self-mastery and inner freedom. As you listen, ask yourself, how has your own suffering shaped who you are today? And are you using it as a wound or as a source of power? Share your reflections in the comments as we begin this profound journey together. 1. Emotional collapse happens quietly. Emotional collapse rarely arrives with drama or obvious warning signs. For those who have been through too much, the breaking point does not announce itself with chaos. It arrives quietly, internally, invisibly. It is not the kind of tiredness that sleep can fix, but a deep inner collapse that forms after carrying emotional weight far beyond what the human nervous system was designed to hold. On the surface, they may still function, still speak, still move through daily life, but inside, something essential has begun to give way in silence. This kind of collapse is not sudden. It is the slow accumulation of unprocessed grief, repeated disappointments, suppressed fear, unspoken rage, and long-term emotional responsibility that was never meant to be carried alone. Day after day, the pressure builds without release, like a structure bearing more weight than it was engineered for, until one quiet moment when nothing appears to happen, yet everything changes. There is no external explosion, no breakdown that draws attention, only an internal surrender, where the psyche reaches its limit and quietly stops striving to hold it all together. People who experience this silent collapse often do not look broken to the world. They still show up. They still smile. They still perform the roles expected of them. But inside, they feel emptied, disconnected, emotionally hollow. What once mattered no longer moves them the same way. What once energized them now feels distant. This numbness is not peace. It is the nervous system pulling inward after enduring too much without safety or relief. Carl Jung captured this inner dynamic when he said, "What we resist persists, because suppressed suffering does not disappear. It reshapes the inner world from within." This is often the hidden gateway into spirituality and spiritual awakening, not through light or inspiration at first, but through disillusionment and emotional exhaustion. The collapse quietly strips away the illusion of endless strength, the identity built around survival, the belief that one must endure everything without pause. As the old emotional structure weakens, the person is forced inward into reflection, into solitude, into the deep confrontation with their own inner landscape where pain, meaning, and transformation coexist. Rather than destroying the individual, this quiet collapse begins to reorganize them. Priorities shift, sensitivities sharpen, tolerance for superficiality fades. The person becomes more discerning, more selective, less willing to betray themselves for approval. This change is not loud or performative. It is subtle, slow, and deeply internal. The soul, no longer able to survive through suppression alone, begins to seek truth instead of endurance, depth instead of distraction, authenticity instead of adaptation. Those who have gone through too much often emerge with a presence that feels different, not hardened, but weighted with awareness. They have seen the cost of emotional denial. They understand the dangers of carrying too much alone. And without consciously choosing it, they step onto a path where healing is no longer optional. The silent collapse becomes the moment where unconscious survival gives way to conscious transformation, where the psyche stops merely enduring and begins, quietly, to awaken. If you feel this, declare it below. I am stronger than my pain. 2. Resilience is a survival response, not strength. Resilience is often misunderstood and deeply romanticized, but for those who have gone through too much, it is not a symbol of strength or peace. It is a survival response carved into the nervous system by years of pressure, disappointment, and emotional overload. Their calmness is frequently mistaken for stability, control, or even wisdom. Yet beneath that still surface often lies emotional numbness, created as a shield against constant strain. This numbness is not chosen. It is learned. It develops when there is no safe space to fall apart, when vulnerability leads to more harm instead of comfort, and when enduring becomes the only option. What people praise as strength is often a quiet form of self-protection, a way of staying functional when life offers no room to feel. Their resilience is not confidence. It is an automatic adaptation to a life that gives them no other choice. Over time, this adaptation becomes so natural that even the person who carries it may forget what it felt like to be emotionally open, to feel joy without calculation, to rest without guilt. From a psychological perspective, this form of endurance is not rooted in self-belief, but in self-preservation. The system learns to stay alert, to expect impact, to anticipate loss, and to conserve emotion because expression once felt dangerous. Carl Jung would describe this as the formation of a powerful persona, a mask built for survival in the outer world, while the inner self, wounded and sensitive, retreats into shadow. On the outside, they become reliable, composed, unshakable. On the inside, they may feel disconnected, detached, or strangely empty, unable to access their own softness without fear. This is why so many people who appear the strongest are often the most exhausted, not in body, but in spirit. Their identity has been shaped around endurance rather than expression, around control rather than connection. The danger is not in the armor itself. The danger is forgetting that the armor is not the skin. This is where spirituality and spiritual development quietly begin to play a deeper role, not as an escape from pain, but as a return to what was shut down. When survival mode has lasted too long, the soul begins to seek something beyond endurance. You may feel this as restlessness that no success can satisfy, as a quiet longing for meaning that no distraction can silence. Spirituality, in its purest form, does not demand more strength from you. It asks for honesty. It asks you to recognize that what protected you once may now be limiting your ability to feel alive. Spiritual development begins when you realize that emotional numbness is not peace, and constant resilience is not freedom. It begins when safety is no longer measured by how much you can tolerate, but by how safe you feel being real. True growth does not come from pushing harder against the world, but from learning that you no longer have to brace for impact at every moment. The shift from survival to meaning is one of the most difficult inner transitions a person can make, because it requires letting go of the identity that once kept you alive. The deeper lesson beneath all of this is that resilience saved you, but it is not meant to define you. The calm that came from numbness helped you endure, but it cannot nourish your future. The emotional shutdown that once prevented collapse may now be blocking intimacy, joy, and peace. What appears as strength to the world may feel like quiet isolation within your own chest. Healing does not mean forgetting what you survived. It means no longer living inside the nervous system of that survival. When you move from automatic endurance into conscious presence, when you allow yourself to feel without drowning and trust without losing yourself, you step into a higher level of spiritual development, not as someone who is unbreakable, but as someone who is whole. 3. Their maturity was forced, not nurtured. Their maturity was forced, not nurtured. And if this truth belongs to you, it means you did not grow up because life gently guided you forward, but because it cornered you into becoming strong before you were ready. You learned composure not through safety, but through survival. You learned restraint not through wisdom, but through necessity. On the outside, you appear calm, thoughtful, emotionally intelligent, and steady. But beneath that surface lives the memory of having to grow up without the freedom to be a child, without the protection that allows softness to develop naturally. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." And often, forced maturity is born from this very weight being required to carry emotional responsibility that was never meant for young shoulders. You learned how to read the room instead of being held in one. You learned how to regulate your emotions because no one else could regulate theirs around you. You learned how to stay quiet, how to stay useful, how to stay composed, because chaos punished vulnerability. While other children were forming their identity through play and safety, you were forming yours through observation, endurance, and adaptation. That is not a failure of character. It is a testimony of resilience. But it also leaves a hidden cost. You became wise long before you were allowed to be innocent. You became responsible before you were allowed to be protected. You became strong before you were allowed to be soft. People admire your stability, but they rarely see what it took to build it. They see your calm during conflict, but not the years when fear taught your nervous system how to stay alert. They see your emotional control, but not the nights when you had to soothe yourself in silence. They see your strength, but not the loneliness that carved it into you. And yet this is where spiritual wisdom begins to awaken, because survival forged perception inside you. Carl Jung taught that no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. And your roots went deep into hardship, pain, and emotional absence, not because you chose the depth, but because you were pushed into it. This forced maturity gives you the ability to sense what others feel without words. It trained you to notice shifts in energy, tone, and intention. It taught you to anticipate emotional storms before they arrived. This is not anxiety. It is intelligence shaped by experience. But when survival becomes identity, rest begins to feel unsafe. Softness begins to feel unfamiliar. Receiving care begins to feel uncomfortable. You may feel guilty when you are not being useful, uneasy when there is too much peace, and restless when there is nothing to fix. Strength became your armor long before it had the chance to become your choice. Carl Jung's spiritual wisdom reveals that what remains unconscious controls our lives, and what becomes conscious transforms us. Your forced maturity does not need to remain your cage. It can become your foundation for transformation. Healing does not mean becoming weak. It means becoming whole. It means allowing the child who never felt safe to finally exhale inside the adult who learned how to survive. It means realizing that your discipline, your composure, and your endurance do not need to disappear for softness to exist beside them. True maturity is not emotional numbness. It is not constant control. It is not endless self-sacrifice. Real maturity is the ability to feel deeply without collapsing, to set boundaries without guilt, to rest without shame, and to receive without fear. When you allow this shift to happen, You stop living only as the survivor and begin living as the integrated self. You no longer move through the world scanning for danger. You begin to move through it, choosing presence. The strength that once kept you alive now becomes the strength that allows you to heal. Your pain did not make you broken. It made you perceptive. It did not make you cold. It made you discerning. It did not make you weak. It made you inwardly unshakable. This is the paradox Carl Jung pointed toward again and again. The wound is often the very place where the light enters. And when you finally allow yourself to soften without fear of losing control, you enter a higher state of spiritual wisdom, where power and compassion no longer exist as opposites, but as reflections of the same awakened consciousness. Do you resonate with this? If you do, declare it boldly in the comments. My strength was forged through what I survived. 4. Hypervigilance and overthinking are learned defenses. Hypervigilance and overthinking are not random habits or personality flaws. They are learned defenses shaped by survival. When a person lives for too long in emotional chaos, the brain quietly rewires itself to stay alive in an unpredictable environment. Instead of relaxing into the present moment, the mind becomes hyper-aware of everything. Tone changes, facial expressions, silence, tension in the room, because safety has never been consistent. Over time, this constant scanning becomes automatic. The nervous system learns that danger does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it creeps in through subtle shifts, unfinished sentences, delayed replies, or an unfamiliar look in someone's eyes. What looks like anxiety from the outside is, in truth, a highly trained internal alarm system built from repeated emotional overwhelm. Overthinking grows from the same root. When pain has arrived without warning too many times, the mind begins to rehearse every possible future scenario in advance. Conversations are replayed endlessly. Words are analyzed, reanalyzed, and weighed for hidden meaning. Every decision is examined from many angles, not because the person enjoys mental noise, but because some part of the psyche believes that prediction equals protection. If you can anticipate the blow, maybe you can soften it. If you can read the room fast enough, maybe you can avoid the explosion altogether. Overthinking is not the love of complexity. It is the fear of being caught unprepared when emotional danger strikes again. Carl Jung's insight that neurosis often substitutes for legitimate suffering explains this pattern with striking clarity. When pain cannot be safely expressed, it does not disappear. It changes shape. The grief that was never allowed, the fear that was never soothed, and the confusion that was never explained all transform into hyper-alertness and mental overdrive. Instead of collapsing, the psyche tightens its grip on reality. It stays sharp, awake, and restless. The result is a person who appears tense, sensitive, or guarded, yet beneath that surface lies a system that learned to stay functional in conditions that once felt unbearable. From the perspective of spirituality, this transformation is deeply significant. What once trapped awareness inside fear can later become the gateway to spiritual awakening. Hyper-awareness, when healed, becomes intuition. Sensitivity, when no longer ruled by threat, becomes emotional intelligence and empathy. The same nervous system that once scanned for danger can learn to scan for truth, alignment, and inner peace. Spirituality teaches that nothing in the psyche is wasted. Every adaptation carries hidden potential. Even defenses forged in pain can be reshaped into tools of wisdom when safety is slowly restored. Healing does not mean forcing the mind to stop being alert overnight. It begins with teaching the nervous system that the constant emergency has passed. Through stable relationships, self-trust, breath awareness, and grounded daily rituals, the body gradually learns new signals of safety. The mind no longer has to race ahead to survive. Overthinking slowly shifts into discernment. Hypervigilance softens into presence. The soul, once on permanent guard, begins to rest without guilt. In this transition, many experience a quiet but powerful spiritual awakening. The realization that who they became to survive is not who they must remain to live. When viewed through spiritual wisdom, these patterns are not signs of brokenness. They are signatures of endurance. The brain did exactly what it needed to do in order to survive emotional chaos. Now, in a new season of life, those same patterns are being invited to transform. What once protected against danger can now protect peace. What once guarded against loss can now open the heart to trust again. In this way, hypervigilance and overthinking are revealed not as permanent cages, but as temporary structures the soul built on its path toward deeper awareness, healing, and true spirituality. 5. They carry invisible skills, but also invisible exhaustion. They carry invisible skills, but also invisible exhaustion, and you may recognize this in yourself, because you can sense tension before anyone speaks. Read between the lines when people only offer fragments of truth. Calm others when their emotions overflow, and hold space for those who unknowingly lean on your strength. Yet beneath all of this, you are quietly exhausted in ways few will ever understand. You retreat instead of rest, because retreat feels safer than slowing down. And you help others instead of asking for help, because somewhere along the way, you learned that being useful was safer than being vulnerable. This is not a flaw in your character, but a survival pattern written into your nervous system. A pattern Carl Jung would describe as the psyche adapting by becoming hyper-aware and hyper-capable, even when the soul aches for gentleness. People naturally gravitate toward you because your presence feels steady, your insight feels comforting, and your energy feels grounding. Yet every time you give support that you never receive, your inner world thins a little more, creating a quiet imbalance that spirituality calls the wounded healer, the one who guides others with wisdom while silently carrying their own unspoken fatigue. You became this way because life demanded that you grow up quickly, read emotional landscapes accurately, and navigate chaos with maturity you should never have been forced to develop so early. Over time, being calm became your duty, being perceptive became your defense, and being strong became your identity, until you no longer remembered what it felt like to be held, supported, or understood without having to first earn it. This invisible exhaustion grows heavier because your compassion flows outward far more easily than it flows inward, leaving you spiritually capable but emotionally drained, wise but weary, empathetic but under-nurtured. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And the darkness you carry is not a threat, but a message, a sign that your soul is tired of being the container for everyone else's storms while having no shelter of its own. Your exhaustion is not just physical. It is the fatigue of constantly managing, sensing, absorbing, and healing without pause. You have spent years being the emotional anchor in every room, the one who understands before being understood, the one who carries what others cannot name. And this creates a spiritual imbalance where your giving far exceeds your receiving. When you never ask for help, your relationships become one-directional. When you never rest authentically, your mind becomes crowded. When you never allow softness, your heart becomes overstretched. This is why the most profound step in your spiritual development is not becoming stronger, but becoming softer with yourself, learning that rest is not a reward, boundaries are not weapons, and asking for support is not proof of weakness, but evidence of wisdom. The deeper truth is that your sensitivity is not meant to be a burden. It is a gift that must be protected, nurtured, and honored. Your invisible skills, reading emotions, calming storms, guiding others, are extraordinary, but they require replenishment to remain blessings rather than weights. Your exhaustion is a signal that your soul is asking to be included in the compassion you so freely give. Your journey forward is not about carrying more, but carrying differently. Not about enduring silently, but allowing yourself to be supported openly. And not about proving strength, but reclaiming balance. The lesson is simple. Your empathy deserves boundaries. Your spirit deserves rest. And your heart deserves the same care you have always given to others. Don't forget to subscribe for more spiritual wisdom on transforming invisible strength and silent exhaustion into true inner power. 6. Vulnerability feels dangerous. Vulnerability no longer feels like a place of softness or safety when you have been hurt too many times. Instead, it feels like standing exposed in the middle of a storm with nothing to protect you. You do not struggle with emotional intimacy because you lack depth or feeling, but because each time you once opened your heart, it was followed by pain, misunderstanding, betrayal, or sudden instability. Your nervous system learned to associate openness with danger, so now even when love appears gentle, your body still hesitates. You may long for closeness, but at the same time, you fear what closeness once cost you. As a result, you open yourself in layers, not all at once, not out of manipulation or control, but out of an instinct for survival that has been trained through experience. People may misread your caution as distance, coldness, or emotional unavailability. But inside, what truly exists is a heart that has been wounded deeply and refuses to be shattered again. You reveal truths slowly, carefully observing how the other person responds, watching for consistency, emotional safety, and respect. This slow opening is not a weakness. It is a form of spiritual wisdom shaped by experience. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain," and your guarded nature is evidence of how deeply you have already been pushed into awareness through suffering. You learned that not everyone who listens knows how to hold your truth, and not every space is safe for your emotions. You may find that you are incredibly capable of supporting others, understanding their emotions, and offering compassion. Yet when it comes to your own wounds, you grow quiet. Somewhere in your past, your feelings were either dismissed, misunderstood, or used against you. So now your inner world feels like sacred ground that must be protected. You no longer speak just to be heard. You wait to be understood. Carl Jung also taught that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And for you, accepting your fear of vulnerability is part of that terrifying honesty. You are not broken for for protecting yourself. You adapted. Your caution is not rooted in distrust of others alone, but in memory stored deep within your nervous system. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Even when logic tells you that someone is kind, your subconscious still asks, "Is it safe this time?" That is why you move slowly in emotional connection, testing safety through time, consistency, and behavior instead of words. Just as someone who has been burned once will instinctively pull their hand away from heat, you instinctively pull back from total emotional exposure. This is not weakness. This is conditioning shaped by survival. Through the lens of spirituality and the insights of Carl Jung, your guarded heart is not a flaw, but a threshold. Your boundaries are not walls built to block love. They are sacred gates that protect what is tender and real within you. Spiritual wisdom does not demand that you tear down every defense all at once. Instead, it invites you to become conscious of why those defenses exist and to soften them only where safety has been earned. You are not meant to give full access to everyone who shows interest in you. Trust is not immediate for those who have gone through too much. It is built slowly, carefully, and with discernment. At the same time, healing begins when you realize that your past is not a prophecy for every future connection. Not everyone will repeat the patterns that wounded you. Growth does not mean forcing yourself into vulnerability before you feel ready. It means learning how to recognize safer environments and allowing yourself to open at your own pace. Your sensitivity is not a liability. It is evidence of how deeply you once trusted and how deeply you still hope. Vulnerability may still feel dangerous, but with time, awareness, and self-compassion guided by spiritual wisdom and the teachings of Carl Jung, it can slowly transform from a threat into a bridge toward relationships that honor your emotional truth. 7. They love deeply, but fear abandonment. People who have gone through too much often love with a depth that feels rare, steady, and unwavering. Yet hidden inside, that devotion is a quiet fear shaped by earlier wounds. They love wholeheartedly because they know what it feels like to receive too little. And this history gives their affection a purity that few can understand. Their loyalty is intense, their emotional intuition is sharp, and their sensitivity to subtle changes in behavior is not an overreaction. It is a survival response formed in moments when inconsistency meant danger, withdrawal, or emotional abandonment. As Carl Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain, and for souls shaped by hardship, spirituality and spiritual awakening are often born from learning to navigate a world where love was unpredictable and safety was never guaranteed, because they grew up or lived through environments where they had to observe small emotional cues to protect themselves. They learned to read people deeply, noticing tone shifts, energy drops, and even silence. A late reply, a distracted voice, or a moment of distance may feel small to others, but to them, it can trigger an old wound, reminding them of times when affection faded without explanation. Their hearts remember the pattern long before their minds do, and this memory often makes them cautious, even when they desperately want to trust. Yet their sensitivity is not weakness. It is emotional intelligence refined by experience. These people became intuitive long before they understood the meaning of intuition. They learned to sense emotional storms before they arrived and to hold themselves together when others could not offer support. This makes them exceptional partners and friends because they show up consistently, listen deeply, and offer the kind of empathy that can only be shaped by lived experience. But it also makes them vulnerable because their steady love stands next to a fear that the people they care about might one day disappear the same way others once did. Small acts of carelessness, forgetfulness, inconsistency, and emotional distance can pierce their hearts more sharply than intentional harm. Not because they are fragile, but because those small breaks mirror wounds they worked hard to heal. Their love is a paradox of strength and tenderness. They give without hesitation, trust with their whole being once they feel safe, and carry an inner loyalty that does not waver even in difficulty. But this same loyalty becomes their soft spot, because when they commit fully. And when they lose someone, they lose them deeply. They do not know how to love halfway. Their hearts are all or nothing, shaped by years of learning that genuine connection is rare and should be protected. When they sense distance, they do not become angry, they become afraid. When they sense inconsistency, they do not assume indifference, they assume danger. And when they love someone, they love with an intensity that reflects all the versions of themselves that survived the past. Yet inside that fear lies tremendous spiritual wisdom. People who fear abandonment are not broken, they are awakening. Their spiritual awakening begins the moment they realize that their sensitivity is not a burden, but a guide, leading them toward healing, connection, and self-understanding. They begin to see that not every inconsistency means loss. Not every silence means rejection. And not every shift in energy means someone is leaving. They learn to distinguish the voice of past wounds from the reality of present love. And gradually, they discover that stability can be built within, not only sought in others. Their journey is not about avoiding abandonment. It is about learning that they no longer need to abandon themselves. If this message about loving deeply, yet fearing abandonment resonates with you, comment, "I am healing," below your voice matters, and your story helps others feel less alone. 8. Their pain becomes wisdom and compassion. Their pain becomes wisdom and compassion, not because suffering is kind, but because they refuse to let it break them. Instead of hardening their hearts, they grow. They reflect, analyze, and quietly transform every wound into insight. Each hurt becomes a lesson, and each lesson becomes a deeper understanding of themselves and the world around them. Through this inner work, they become emotionally literate, able to recognize, name, and navigate complex feelings rather than be controlled by them. Their spirituality and spiritual development do not come from escape, but from the courage to face what hurts and still choose awareness, balance, and growth. What appears from the outside as a quiet presence is actually profound inner strength. Behind their calm is a long history of storms survived in silence, tears learned to be carried with dignity, and disappointment turned into clarity. They do not need to speak loudly to prove their power. Their energy is steady, grounded, and deeply reassuring. Because they have known loneliness, confusion, and emotional loss firsthand, their empathy is not theoretical, it is lived. They listen without rushing to fix, understand without needing to judge, and hold space without demanding anything in return. Over time, they naturally become lighthouses for others, not by trying to save anyone, but by simply being who they have become. Their life itself is proof that pain does not have to end in bitterness. They turn survival into service, offering presence instead of perfection, understanding instead of advice, and compassion instead of control. People feel safe around them, not because they pretend everything is fine, but because they know what it means when everything is not fine, and they did not give up on themselves. Their journey shows that wisdom is not inherited. It is earned through reflection, endurance, and emotional honesty. Compassion is not weakness. It is strength refined through suffering. And spiritual development is not an escape from pain. It is the ability to walk through it with awareness, dignity, and purpose. Their life becomes a quiet reminder that even the deepest wounds, when faced with truth and courage, can become sources of light, not only for the self, but for everyone who crosses their path. In the end, Carl Jung reminds us that those who have endured too much are not broken, they are forged. Their depth, resilience, and inner awareness come from pain transformed into wisdom. If this message resonated with your journey, let it be a reminder that your struggles have meaning and your strength is real. If you found value in this reflection, please like, share, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss our future videos on healing, depth, and awakening.